The title of our episode is Did Me Too Get Bill Cosby? That's a question being asked, and of course it has been asked before in the American body politic, in the social epoch, and in social media. It's a recurring question, the Me Too movement, of course, being around based upon women that have had similar experiences. Similar experiences, if you go to, say, Harvey Weinstein and his cultural setup there in Hollywood, it's one of the things to look at very quickly. You have to look at the culture of the times, or what was, quote-unquote, the norm in the entertainment business, that the Harvey Weinsteins operated freely, and that entertainers, some of lesser status than a Bill Cosby, etc., were out and about, and the old casting couch was busy. And now you hear from various actresses that what had happened to them, or people attempted to pull off these fallacious schemes. But it goes beyond Hollywood and the entertainers, quote-unquote, and into the business world. More prevalent actually in the business world than in the world of Hollywood. Why is that? Well, there are a lot of aspiring people in Hollywood that aspire to be actors, actresses, etc., various other jobs affiliated with the movie making industry or the entertainment industry. But it also happens in sports, and it also cuts into a societal thing, that there are people that are groupies that hang around entertainers, or attempt to hang around entertainers, particularly ball players. The NBA, there are a number of ball players have talked about it. Basketball players, groups of women following them from city to city. And again, when you play as many games as they do, same thing in professional baseball, other sports out there. And today, with the invent you didn't have at the time of the Cosby show, but many channels, many shows, reality shows. There's a little bit of a Kardashians for everyone to play in that particular playground if they want to. And you even have people like DJ Trump in the playground, because he had a reality TV show. He ended up there with some Playboy models, various other types that were filtering through, and other women that made accusations against him. Does that go into the quote-unquote Me Too movement also? Well, that would depend. Obviously, we've looked at polls, and you go from individual to individual. In the case at hand, what we're going to look at here is some of the newspapers that coming from Monopoly Media, the Philadelphia Inquirer. We'll look at, it's a local paper. We'll look at it, and we'll look at the New York Times coverage. We start this out, actually, the mindset, looking at the AP's coverage of this event. We went to NPR, how they covered it, what they had to say about it. And we'll look at the defense's posture in the trial. That has a very big impact on it. Mr. Mezera, how he conducted the defense. Before I forget, this is on the 26th of April, 2018, from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. Remind you that we have several programs coming up. Friday Jobber will come up on Friday morning. And then we have The Week That Was, as always, is normally on a Saturday morning. Sundays we usually have special programming here at WBRN. And we have Numbers Man. That's our financial and macroeconomic program. We invite you to stay tuned to it. And also we have the Open Source Report, which is our technical report. Comes about 2 or 3 times a month. Not sure if we'll have one this week or not out there. and the Monday Morning Quarterback, where we quarterback talk shows, or we quarterback current events. We've sort of been moving around there. We need to catch up with the national leader, Al Sharpton. We need his conventions, of course, always in April. We didn't report on it. We used to report on his activities almost weekly. We will go back to more of the coverage of Dr. Sharpton and the National Action Network, because they're involved in the community. Also today, and we'll have this on Friday Java, Red for Education, that's in the state of Arizona, and see what is moving on there. If we have time, we'll look at it in this presentation here. But let's firstly go to the Philadelphia newspaper, which is the Inquirer, and the announcement there of we can get to him. The headline here, Bill Cosby guilty in sexual assault trials, lashes out at DA. Well, he didn't lash out. We'll just read some of it here. This is Montgomery County found Bill Cosby guilty on the only criminal charges to emerge from a career-ending scandal, but fueled by dozens of women who accused the entertainer, once known as America's dad, of sexual assault. After only 13 hours, I added the word only, the panel of 7 men and 5 women, a little unusual panel there, on Thursday convicted him of drugging and assaulting Angela Constad. She was at one time a worker for the Temple University, who said she saw Cosby as a father figure. Others would say she saw him as a piggy bank there, a mentor in early 2004. Now, this is sort of what is going on here. It's 14 years later that this came up. I've always had very mixed feelings about these types of trials that don't have documentation. What I mean by documentation, particularly in sexual assaults, any criminal defense attorney that's involved in those types of cases, you would normally want some type of medical collaboration. If you don't have medical collaboration, you have a family, etc. But normally, it would come about much more quickly. Bill Cosby is now 80 years old, could face up to 10 years in prison. That doesn't matter very much. With a 10-year sentence, he would normally serve about 8 if he could survive. The jury's decision was announced. Cosby offered a little visual reaction, but gazed down at the defense table, looking stunned. His spokesman leaned forward and with his head in his hands. Comstock stood in the front row and looking ahead as the guilty verdict on 3 counts of aggravated, indecent, and this is assault was announced. To some of Cosby's other accusers in the packed courtroom let out audible signs of relief. A few began to loudly sob, and of course were removed. The judge in this particular situation, Stephen T. O'Neill, told the jurors this has been an extraordinarily difficult case. They were sequestered. I think the first jury was not sequestered, if my memory is correct, for most of the month, as they were thanked, of course, for their service and sent on their way. The verdict delivered the first celebrity conviction in what the Inquirer calls the MeToo era, in a case that in many ways stood as a vanguard, siphoned a spotlight on the role of sexual entitlement, the scandal-hungry media and Hollywood casting couch culture played in the ruin of a comedian icon. Well, the casting couch of Hollywood, scandal-hungry media, yeah, they're correct about that. You have to sell the newspapers. But in the end, it was a 13-year-old account of one of Cosby's first accusers that now threatens to send him to prison, potentially for the rest of his life. O'Neill's expected to sentence Cosby at a later date, but the district attorney there, Steele. Now, it's interesting about Steele, and this had been our misgivings about this whole situation. Steele based his election campaign against the DA that did not prosecute Cosby on this particular case. And obviously the use of an amicus against African Americans, no doubt about it, in a racially charged situation. He immediately argued that Cosby bail should be revoked, he should be jailed. He argued the entertainer had a plane and could flee. This is somebody who has unlimited wealth. Well, nobody has unlimited wealth. He no doubt does have wealth, and probably more wealth, obviously, than DJ Trump. Steele argued, I don't think any amount of bail could assure his presence under these circumstances. Cosby yelled almost as to himself, he doesn't have a plane, you asshole. Old Bill got a comedic line in there. After all, the judge rejected the prosecutor's request. Bill Cosby, incidentally, is legally blind. The next thing the prosecutor would claim, Cosby would fly off on his own. Anyway, keeping Cosby's bail conditional to the same in order to remain at his house at Cheltenham, unless approved to go elsewhere. The entertainer also must undergo an assessment if he must register as a violent sex predator. I doubt very seriously he's a violent sex predator. But anyway, his court was to adjourn. A group of advisor supporters ran to Cosby's side. He said nothing as he was led from the courtroom on the arm of Andrew Wyatt, that is his spokesman there. Tom Mesereau vowed an appeal. The fight is not over, he said. Tom Mesereau, if you remember him, he was the attorney for Michael Jackson. Outside, whirlybirds, as LBJ would call them, helicopters were around, and I feel like my faith in humanity has been restored. This is Lily Brennan, one of the accusers, as she fought back. Tears, women's lives mattered, free Bill, and Black Power. Climbed in his SUV with shouts from the crowd, women's lives matter, free Bill. Well, it's sort of the way it goes here. This Constead character is 45 years old. She's a Canadian. More than a decade ago, the comedian paid her $3.4 million in a civil trial. And that was after her story had been rebuffed in 2006 by prosecutors who doubted she could stand up to courtroom scrutiny. Then last year, another jury was unable to unanimously agree on her claim. Now, this is kind of interesting here. I had not looked at the timetable. There's always something that you miss out here. I thought that was earlier than that. Oh, this is Castor. Now, Bruce Castor was a man who was defeated in the election that Steele won. Anyway, told a judge that he couldn't remember every detail from a decade-old investigation of Bill Cosby. But one point, the former Montgomery County district attorney was certain his 2006 declaration that he would not pursue sexual assault charges on a claim by the Temple University worker Constead was not getting prosecuted at all. As far as I was concerned, Castor said, my belief that I had the power to make such a statement. Castor was a sole witness in a day-long hearing as Cosby's lawyers mounted a bid to throw out the case they contend should never been filed. For 6 hours in a packed, this is Norristown, the same place, and at the time, Bill Cosby was 78 years old. violated a non-prosecution agreement Castor made with their client a decade ago. Prosecution by the current said no such deal exists. Well, the current judge, why he asked Castor, did you make the agreement? And you did not make the agreement. It was unnecessary. Castor replied. Now, I didn't know this. I probably read it and didn't register on my mind, unfortunately. It was unnecessary, Castor replied, because I had concluded there was no way the case against Cosby would get any better. Now, since several minutes of peppering, this is the same judge here, O'Neill. The hearing marked the first major proceeding since Cosby's arrest. Hanging there, Bill, one yelled back from the sidewalk there. The county worker for 3 decades, including 2 terms each as district attorney, county commissioner. Castor shook hands with and kissed a bail up on the cheek as he sat tall in his signature pinstripe suit and cowboy boots. Interesting here. Let's see what else is here. Hearing was opportunity for Castor, 54, to explain to a packed room with lawyers and reporters why he didn't arrest Cosby when Constad first alleged the comedian drugged and assaulted her in his Cheltenham mansion. That was in January of 2004. She had ruined her own credibility and would not be believed by jury, he said. Now, Castor said he had been troubled by inconsistencies in her Constad's 2005 statements to police, and by the fact she had contacted a civil lawyer before reporting the allegations. This is something that would normally sink you in a criminal trial. Also, several conversations he said Constad had with Cosby over the phone, and that was brought out in this trial. Her actions on her own include going to an attorney before the police. Now, that would seem as opportunistic, period. Castor met with Cosby's former criminal lawyer, Walter Phillips, more than once during the first investigation. Said he informed Phillips, who died last year, of his decision not to prosecute Cosby. Castor testified that in 2005 decision had been mischaracterized as if it was a negotiation or a joint approval deal. I kept seeing the word agreement, he said. Has anybody used the word wrong? Instead, Castor outlined what he described as a binding legal decision he reached on his own. I made a judgment as a sovereign representative of the Commonwealth not to prosecute Cosby, he said. I was the only person in Pennsylvania who had the power to make that decision, and I made it. Castor said he knew a civil trial was coming and set up the dominoes to fall in such a way that Cosby would be forced to testify. Cosby's lawyer claimed the comedian only agreed to set in for a deposition in the civil lawsuit filed because he believed he would never be prosecuted. That in itself is a very big mistake. Now, I'm assuming Cosby's civil lawyer was in charge of that, not his criminal lawyer, because any criminal lawyer knows that a civil trial can turn into a criminal trial very, very quickly. I personally been involved in cases that we used a civil trial to head off a criminal indictment, and it worked. But the problem is you're looking ahead. You have to look ahead and know that any civil proceeding and any deposition that you give, and you understand why Michael Cohen is taking his Fifth Amendment there. Cosby should have took the Fifth there. He was not represented properly there. Transcript previously confidential testimony in which he described his encounter and admitted obtaining methylqualone to give to women with whom he hoped to have sex. Now, he didn't say he gave it to her. Castor said he had been consistent, explained everything. Much of his testimony focused on the choice of words and their meaning. In one email last fall, Castor, if a prosecution could be made out without using what Cosby said, I believe then and continue to believe that the prosecution is not precluded. Ryan asked, how is this not a contradiction? If I'm referring to Constad's case, I would have written the prosecution, he said, a prosecution referral to other victims. The current case marks the first time Cosby has faced a criminal charge. And no doubt about that, Brian McMonagle, at one point, I'm not on your team. Castor, meanwhile, tried to dispel the notion that he was a witness for the defense. Well, understand he was a witness for the defense, and this is really where the blunder went. As we go back to MeToo, there were some blunders made, and a blunder made by Cosby's civil attorney in 2005 is when she sent the charges, she made the charge to the police, but she had already went to a civil litigator, and of course she obtained the $3.4 million. And that set the tone for the whole thing. Although the thing was sealed, and the settlement was sealed under a motion of protection, it's called. Anyway, won't get a lot into that. But it was, again, broken on the thing that a criminal trial would supersede any civil trial. So this is one of the big factors that come out here. Let me just finish up with the inquiry here. What happens? Cosby is guilty. No doubt about that. The nice smiling face of Bill Cosby on 3 counts. He'd go to prison, walks out of court without a change in his bail. Well, there's no doubt about that. That's not unusual. Will he sentence him at the date? Not yet. There'll be a sentencing date. They have to clear some paperwork up. He has to be assessed. Will he have a chance to remain on free during bail? Well, that's 50-50 right there. A lot of it will be his health. Of course, his age there. Faces a maximum of a sentence of 10 years in prison for each count, but typically consider other factors. And no doubt about that. So this is basically it. His accusers have sued him, of course, in California and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for defamation. Yeah, defamation is one of those things he can sue, and it's a different situation. Let's go to the New York Times. The headline you can see right here is Graham Bosley and John Hurley. Bill Cosby found guilty of sexual assault after years of accusations. Morristown found Bill Cosby guilty of drugging and sexually assaulting a woman in his home 14 years ago, capping the downfall of one of the world's best-known entertainers, offering a measure of satisfaction to dozens of women who for years have accused him of similar assaults. And you can see the editorializing here on the second day of deliberation. This is this town in the northwest of Philadelphia returned the guilty verdict. 3 counts there. We'll get into everything happened there. Sat back in his chair after the verdict, the same basis. Several of women accused Cosby of abusing them and attended the trial. And they put in, but the judge said it was an extraordinary, difficult case, no doubt about that. The Montgomery prosecutor, opportunist Steele, a Republican, Charged that Cosby's $1 million bail be revoked, suggesting he'd been convicted of a serious crime, owned a plane, and could flee. And that's when Cosby made his famous statement out there. He doesn't have a plane, you asshole. That would probably be remembered as one of Cosby's famous statements. He was a philanderer. He used a drug that people these days don't know about. They call it Quaaludes with some women, but not with Constar. Constar for a desperate corn artist, no doubt about that. People tend to believe what they want to believe, and this is one of the big situations there. The prosecution counted Kimberly Gibbons Feeden, told the jury she is not the con, he is. Well, she has a record of being a con artist there. Bill Cosby, is Bill Cosby a con artist? No. Bill Cosby admitted his shortcomings, and his shortcomings have been in print. This is one of the problems you have with a high-profile case. It can cut either way. There are those that believe Bill, and many that do not. It's not the type of case with O.J. Simpson, not quite as polarizing, and part of the reason is that Bill's age, he's 80 years old, and at the same time, the persona of America's Dad, that's in a sitcom, and a sitcom, of course, is not a reality TV show. Now you have a reality TV show. Bill Cosby could have played a criminal and, like DJ Trump, be liked by his supporters. No problem at all. A different set of standards there. But at the same time, there is obviously a media bias. Go Orad there and the various others that move around presenting these cases. You remember with Roy Moore. Roy Moore's case probably would have had a lot to do with this, with more conservative leaning, and we don't have any polling on who these jurors were in terms of their political terms out there than anything else. So there were those in Alabama, they almost split 50-50. Did they believe Roy Moore? Did not believe Roy Moore. Well, in the end, Republicans, independents, there were enough that believed that Roy Moore was involved in hanky-panky. But that was a different case. This was a fellow walking around shopping malls looking for younger or teenage women when he was, in fact, in his 30s. A little different situation. But it's a very old allegations there. And when you have very old allegations in themselves, they're not really time-tested. I've always looked at them as being a bit suspicious. Now, obviously, we all understand that sometimes, and many sexual assaults are not reported. No doubt about that. And also, let's get to the defense stands here, Mr. Mesereau. There used to be a standard topic of criminal defense lawyers would dirty up the reputation of the accuser. Now, in this case, they talked about her con games, that sort of thing. As far as I know, they did not bring in any other sexual encounters she had. And that used to be the game of it, sleeping around, etc., would expose the person. Of course, with Stormy Daniels, what could you do? You could forget about that one. That's why Trump is in negotiation, as they call it, euphemistically. Incidentally, he made some remarks on Michael Cohen, said, yeah, he took care of that for him, but the FBI is looking at him for his own businesses. So effectively, he's thrown Michael Cohen onto the bus that many of us have dropped onto there. His nominee, we're going off a little bit here, but his nominee for the head of Veteran Affairs, Admiral Jackson, otherwise known as Candyman, because of his supposed frequently giving out of prescription drugs. We don't know if he did or he didn't. There'd be obviously a record of that, but he is history. Now, in 2006, she got the $3.38 million settlement. It was a confidential settlement, now brought to light. She had brought against him after prosecutors originally declined to bring charges. Now, she had started negotiating for this settlement before she went to the police, and that would you'd assume to most people that in itself would bring out the amicus against Mr. Cosby. Now, Kathleen Bliss, one of the lawyers at mob rule is not due process. Was there mob rule in this case? There was mob rule in the media. Now, I don't know how much that influenced the jury, but you had to remember, Bill Cosby was tried and the jury was hung, and the information was out there. Anytime you face that as a defense lawyer, you're working from a disadvantage, period. And what she was referring to was a charged atmosphere in the American society. There is more of an awareness. Now, I don't know if I would necessarily characterize it as a charged atmosphere. I think people are more aware of it. I think they were always aware of it. Most people, at least I remember the 60s and 50s, knew about and heard about they had the gossip pages in those days about the casting couch in Hollywood. It had been around in the 20s, 30s, and since Hollywood has been there, everyone knew about that. And they also knew about the victimization of would-be actors. One of the situations carried on. It was a quite common situation. It would not surprise at this mic that more of these cases will come out. What happened to Harvey Weinstein, I don't know if they'll be able to put the criminal hat on him anywhere or not. Perhaps so. If they do, he's doomed. And more than likely, it would depend on which case that they brought up there. So the prosecutor called the attacks on women the same sort of filth and shameful criticism that kept some of the victims from ever coming forward. Well, in this type of case, especially a criminal case, you're going to have that nice picture of Mr. These are both Kathleen Bliss here and Mr. Miserable. These are older attorneys, have been around a very, very long time. You wonder about the tactic. Did the tactic turn the jury off? I don't know. They'll come out and we'll have reports on that later. If you notice in this cast, I used the word I more than I ever used it out. At the time of the attack, she was in her 30s and Bill Cosby was 66. Now, he said he gave her Benadryl. He probably did give her Benadryl. Quaaludes had long since stopped the production, and that is one of the situations here. And I won't go into these other liaisons, we'll call them, or what was Dickerson here, in Lake Tahoe, was a lot of those. So anyway, that was from the New York Times, and we've already talked about the Stormy Daniels affair. Did the MeToo movement sway? This is also from the Times. Trial of Bill Cosby proves what social scientists might call a natural experiment. In the spring of 2017, a jury could not agree on the drugging sexual assault there. But between the trial and this one came revelations about Harvey Weinstein, a crusade of other powerful, powerful men that invigorated the MeToo movement. The big question, would it make a difference? Well, it may have. The jury deliberated not even 2 days. That's a bad sign usually there in a complicated case. With the 6-day trial, with 6 days in the first round. Well, that was much harder. There were key factors. The jury saw a new defense witness who testified that Comstock had said it would be easy to use fabricated abuse claims to extort a celebrity. That was very interesting because that was presented there. The judge allowed, now this is the key here, a lot of things at trial revolves around the judge. He allowed 5 of the Cosby's accusers to testify out of 60, that's supposedly out there. The same had suggested that the judge's decision was and also was also a response to shifting social values after MeToo, possibly so. Jurors, male and female alike, have been notoriously reluctant to convict in sexual misconduct cases, particularly when the accuser is significantly more powerful than the victim, or the victim is a poor or member of a minority group. Comstock was not. Prosecutors and other jury experts say juries tend to focus on 2 main issues. 1, whether they believe the accuser, and 2, whether the sexual behavior was consensual. That's always a question. The question of consent gets particular scrutiny when the victim previously knew the accuser. In a series of mock trials in the UK, many jurors said that acquaintance rape were less clear-cut and more difficult to prove than by strangers, no doubt about that. I would go for here from Deborah Turkenheimer, a law professor at Northwestern University, former prosecutor. But they must be able to imagine themselves or someone else close to them in their shoes, especially in cases that hang on a he said, she said evidence. A jury must not only believe the victim, and do we care? Do we think this is serious? Do we think it is worth a conviction? Juries frequently scrutinize such issues as whether or not the victim fought back, whether she had injuries to prove it, whether she had been drinking, or whether she had done something to signal consent. Evidently, she brought a bath soap or whatever over to Cosby's place. Jurors also doubt victims that do not show emotion on the stand. Well, I don't know about all that. For the first trial, a single male juror, anonymously by the Inquirer, said, let's face it, she went up to his house with bear mitts and incense and bath salts. What the heck? That is kind of interesting there. And then they cite Angela Jolene, Uma Thurman, and others that have testified, well-known women, that they were either victimized or not victimized. There is the Cosby case. Me Too. We'll finish this up now. The jury took a very little time to find Cosby guilty. That's Michael Dempsey, a law professor at Villanova University, cautioned that the verdict should not be regarded as a litmus test for Me Too. No doubt about that, but simply the jury decision in a single case. Most important, she said, Michelle Dempsey, did I say Michael? Okay, is that the case is a part of a shift in what she called the norms of accountability. People could discuss abuse on Twitter, while many companies have beefed up harassment training. Hope so. It's not just a matter of taking people to court, Dr. Dempsey said, and they now call her doctor to give her more authority. We recognize that there are a lot of ways to hold people accountable for sexual harassment and sexual violence. Well, yeah, such things as loss of reputation, civil suits, now taking people to court. I'm assuming she's talking about criminal court, but perhaps also civil litigation could be involved there. There are a lot of extraordinary remedies out there, and the Me Too movement goes on. So to answer my own question here, we'll pause briefly here for a non-commercial moment and go to Arizona, and we'll come back and I'll answer my question. I just want to check on the strike out there we've been covering Red for Education.
Demonstration in the Red for Ed movement. Protesters want more money pumped into Arizona's education system.
Sky 12 is flying over the march right now, and as you can see, there is a large presence. Most of these are teachers, maybe some students, parents, all supporting more money for education. Team 12's Joe Dana is live at the state capitol for us with the latest on this fight for funding. Joe?
Mark, at least a couple thousand teachers are out here right now chanting, "What's the plan, Ducey? Red for Ed." You know, the governor has proposed in his budget a 1% teacher raise for the next school year. That would amount to perhaps a few $100s, a couple hundred depending on your salary. But when you consider what's taken place over the past decade, the state is still playing catch-up. Consider the current proposed budget is $952 million less than compared to 2008 levels. Per pupil spending back then was nearly $5,000. Last year, it was close to $800 less when adjusted for inflation. That's $800 less per pupil. All of this taking a toll on a lot of teachers, including one who we first met last year. Take a look.
This latest slap in the face.
Her open letter to Governor Doug Ducey last year rallied teachers and went viral on social media.
My fifth year has made me loathe you, Doug Ducey, as you pat yourself on the back for the pennies a day you've tossed to teachers.
Now in her sixth year, making just over $41,000 annually at Basha High School in Chandler, Mallory Heath has decided this will be her last.
The tipping point was really just understanding that as much as I wanted to stay for the kids, I had to make a choice for myself.
A choice, she says, that's involved a grieving process.
To know that kind of the death of teacher me is quickly approaching has been really difficult, particularly because this is what I went to college for. It was the life that I thought I would be able to have. And that's just not an option anymore.
Like hundreds of other teachers, this year alone, Mallory has decided she can make more money elsewhere. She's put the blame squarely at the top. Governor Doug Ducey's budget this year alone remains nearly $1 billion short of 2008 funding levels.
He's the man who touts himself as the education governor. So to make that type of claim, he better take education seriously. And he has shown us time and time again with his actions that he is a man with no real insight or plan.
Mallory represented the kind of teachers districts are trying to keep. She headed up 3 clubs, attended summer training seminars.
Teachers need to be supported. They need to be able to pursue professional development and continuing education.
Senior David Carranza says Ms. Heath is the one teacher who changed the way he thinks about English class.
Because I wasn't a bright student in that aspect, I wish she could stay.
In a state experiencing high turnover and low pay, Ms. Heath is just one of the faces behind the discouraging numbers. Back here at the state capitol, within the next hour, we are expecting the Education Association to announce a series of demands that they will make to legislators and the governor. The big question is how specific will those demands be, and what will teachers be willing to do if those demands aren't met? We'll be getting that information and have the update for you at 6 o'clock. At the Capitol, I'm Joe Dana. Back to you.
That was
Right now, Arizona teachers
a video from Channel 12 News in Phoenix, Arizona, where it is now 92 degrees Fahrenheit, if you can believe that. We'll continue to cover this event more on Friday. Jabba, one of the commitments we have, and we've been doing this from West Virginia, the Commonwealth of West Virginia, the Commonwealth of Kentucky, the very red state of our late and great partner Jerry Pippin in Oklahoma, with these teachers' actions, walkouts, strikes, etc. And this is the latest one in the course. So we'll continue this effort. To finally answer the question here, yes, the MeToo movement did have some effect, and the stratagem of the defense there with Comstock. I'm not sure if they had Constad, if they had any wiggle room there, because the credibility of her was not very good at all. But then you look at it from the jurors with the Me Too movement out there and the change in the social climate, what it means the social climate can change. and should change. And in the final analysis, if we look at this dialectically, this is good for the American culture. It has changed. It is coming out into the open. But there's also rumors and evidence that, particularly in Hollywood and these various corporate outfits, that they're now adjusting their quote-unquote hiring goals to move away from "I, a Woman." I remember Helen Reddy's song. We usually use that as a theme. And it's a disturbing process. But beyond just simple assaults, we are more interested in, as the teacher there in Arizona, a profession that used to be pretty much dominated by women, at least at the lower levels where she was, and she is leaving it. And if we look at medical care, nursing, where a predominant amount of people there, and remember Ms. I forget, out in Salt Lake City, Utah, being drugged out there and being in the front. But those are the kinds of things that women suffer. So one thought I want to leave with you is that, yes, the assaults are bad, and they should be prosecuted. But also other types of economic disparities that women suffer should be addressed also, including the 78 cents or less of every dollar that men make. The inequality in the information technology, if you look at Facebook, Google, and those places, women are not there where they should be, the levels, and even more dismal when you leave the bigger companies, quote-unquote, the more prominent name companies, as to the employment of women. So those are things that also need to be continuously propagandized around, or championed by people in the progressive community, and people not in the progressive community should also champion those situations. But we have literally into the White House an unfortunate situation. When you talk about absolute power, Bill Cosby is an entertainer, a very wealthy person, worth more than DJ Trump. DJ Trump inflates his net worth. But Bill Cosby also committed another sin, as pointed out by Professor Reed out in Oakland, Berkeley. He wanted to buy NBC, Universal. And that was, he got NBC, he got hold of not only NBC, but probably Comcast. And using his wealth as a leverage, because these deals are always done with other players, but it would have came out. And that's where white supremacy played into it. If you recall a little bit about Bill Cosby sort of went native against young black males and so-called social responsibility. Now, when you start with that sort of situation there, it can sometimes come back and bite you in the ass. And here it is. So my advice to Bill is get your toothbrush ready. You'll be going to the big house, no doubt about that. But given the age, given his situation, he could be of use to many by teaching classes in a prison on such things as presentation, acting, etc., and just mentoring of younger men to not make the mistakes that he made in his life, but at the same time explain to them how you build a career and do wealth building and that sort of thing. But also on entertainment, how to do it correctly. Not like this fool Burroughs did, opportunism. I mean, there have been opportunistic comedians come out there, and those are the true con men and con women of the genre. Bill Cosby presented an optimistic portrait of America and of the African family. that was, as we used to say, going somewhere, but in a manner in which it was very acceptable. He saved NBC at the time in terms of ratings. This is all for us. We'll see you on a Friday Jobber on the 26th of April, 2018, WBRN Radio and the Boston Red Network. Remember, the teachers wear red today. We're wearing red today. Red for education.